for many years, I think we've defined ourselves as not teacher training. That's where Ed studies, you know, not teacher training. Keep all that Ofsted crap out of this. I think the rationale for putting these together is that I think we now need to be thinking about teacher education. Our students are not doing teacher training, but many of them are going on to teach. And the other thing is it would be good to get more teacher educators into BESA so they can experience what we have here. So that's the rationale, if it's not too flimsy, for having both these. So, Nick, what do you talk
Thank you
about?
very much, Stephen. And it's really nice to be here. Thank you ever so much for the invitation to launch the book. Yes, my name's Nick Sorenson. For the next few days, I'm Assistant Dean at BESA University, but I'm moving on into another exciting phase of my career. And it's just been really wonderful that actually that's coincided with the launch of our book, Diversity in Teacher Education. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you an overview of how we got to write the book, why we did it, what the journey was like, and what's inside the book. Then I'm going to do my sales pitch, and then hand over to Stephen. So keep an eye on the... Just kick me when my time is up. Right. Good. So 2010, the importance of teaching, the government white paper. We see that as really being a 1066 moment, that although it wasn't actually entirely new, it was actually continuing the neoliberal policies that were introduced in the late 80s, but there was a considerable shift and in the way that the government and government policy was engaging with educational practice. And of course, the big step was that there was this move for teacher education to be school-led, as part of a school-led system. And that challenged the role that higher education institutions played in the development of teachers. And so, for universities like your universities, like certainly for BESA that have been involved in teacher education, we've been involved in it for 70 years, it became very worrying. And the then Vice-Chancellor said, you know, we've got to do something about this. We've got to research this. And so we were set up, this project was called Diversity in Teacher Education, in order to gather some evidence as to what the impact of these different routes towards becoming a teacher had. And we asked some questions which, at the outset, which actually we were unable to answer, which is, does any one route lead to a better quality of teacher? Does any one route have a greater impact on student learning in the classroom? So we set this up, and we were very fortunate that we had two members of staff. One was already working with us, Caroline Whiting, and then we had Jeff Whitty, who was appointed as a research professor to actually lead on this project. And the reason for that was that Jeff was involved in a project in the 1990s, which is called the MODE project, Modes of Teacher Education. And so that was actually a funded project by ESRC. And the idea was that we were going to do MOTE version 2. But we didn't have the funding. And to be honest, at that time, we didn't really have the breadth and the tradition of research experience in order to undertake that kind of work. And MOTE was also involved a number of different universities. And we certainly put out, feelers to see if we could actually involve some other universities in this, but it didn't really come off. So we took some pragmatic decisions. And the pragmatic decisions were based around, okay, let's go with what we've got. Let's go with the interests and the passions and the contacts that we have within the Institute of Education, and we will then develop a research project around that. And At the outset, it was actually quite difficult to get a focus and to get agreement about it, but taking that a pragmatic approach certainly brought people together. And then I came up with the idea, I said, look, the way to move on this is actually, let's say we're going to produce a book, and whatever gets in the book, that's the project. And then when we get the book comes out, we can say that the project has come to an end and we've achieved something, which we have done. So that's what we've done. And the Diet Research Programme, as it was called, was based around 4 routes, or 4 phases. So one was a topography of all the existing routes that were in the 2015-16 academic year, trying to chart that. We then did some ethnographic work based on the partnerships that we had at the university with School Direct, with SCITS, with PGC students. We have a third phase which was looking at the outcome of these different routes, which never really got off the ground. And then the fourth phase was a more theoretical route, which was actually asking profound questions about what were the implications for what it means to be a teacher? What are the implications for teacher professionalism? And are these different routes producing different kind of professionals? And to use a concept that Jeff brought into this, you know, for example, our academized teacher training routes produces branded professionals. Yeah? So that they're professional within a very defined corporate context. So, what did we do? Well, we looked to some of the expertise that we had, and we, Catherine Simon, who's probably known to you, is a real expert on policy. And so we asked her to provide a chapter which is looking at the historical policy context of teacher education, mainly since the 1980s, to put what was happening in context. And then the key concept that whatever has happened with teacher education is the notion that it is a partnership activity to create teachers. So the contributions that I made was a chapter about partnership and collaboration. And in the end, we drew evidence on a case study of a SCIT to look at the SCIT and the different partner schools that they worked with. And that was interesting because that really teased out some of the tensions between schools who were collaborating, either through leading a SCIT or being partnered with a SCIT, and also competing with each other as well. So in a dynamic and complex system where change happened very rapidly, that had that had a destabilizing effect on the partnership and the collaboration between schools. Our own head of initial teacher education, who's been working at Bath Spa for a long time, Pat Black, I did an interview with her for her to talk about what did it mean to be faced with these changes, what did it mean to have these various versions of partnership presented to her and her team, and how did they cope with that? And one of the issues that she raised was that it was really important to be able to fall back on the foundational values of the Institute for Education at Bath Spa, the founding principles of teacher education that have been there since 1946. That was really important for her. Another colleague, Martin Duggan, came along and said, "Can I be part of this?" And we said, "Yes, that's right." And she went off and she contacted teacher educators in universities, in 3 universities, and asked them what did it feel from their point of view. And again, that's really interesting because they're having to deal with complex policy changes, they're having to deal with Ofsted, they're having to deal with the obligations for teachers for working in universities to be researchers as well, to make a contribution to the REF. So there are multiple demands on their time. But Linda came up with quite a positive conclusion, because she was saying actually this radical change actually challenged complacency and actually brought out a lot of creative and positive benefits to education departments and professional educators. Jim Horden offers theoretical insights about professional formation. He's really, he draws a lot on the work of Basil Bernstein. And then we had another visiting professor, Ian Mentor, from University of Oxford, who chaired our research meetings, and he contributed an afterword to the book as well. In any collaboration, some people collaborate more than others, and so I want to draw attention to two particular members of the team. One is Carolyn Whiting, who did this, the topography, which was a real challenge because she knew what data she needed, but she just couldn't find it. The data sets were conflicting, and drawing a picture of how many routes, how many students were on each route was a mammoth task. And also she went through 3 iterations of that work. It was published as an occasional paper by the Institute for Education. It was a peer-reviewed journal, and then she did the chapter for the book. It is quite a challenging chapter because there's so many things happening and so complex. She did the topography for the 15-16 academic year, and then we nearly thought about doing it for the next year, but then the rules changed completely, because that was the year where all of a sudden the DFE were deciding, yeah, you can recruit up to a certain point, then you can't, and it was skewing it in front of School Direct. And I suppose it was that point we realised that change was happening so quickly, it was so complex, that actually it's very difficult to have a complete and full picture about what was happening in England. Yeah, one more minute then. That's it. And then finally, Jeff Whitty, who wrote the foreword to the book. I mean, Jeff is an extraordinary academic. It was a privilege to be able to work with him. And what's a foreword to a book? A couple of 100 words? That'll be fine. Thank you, Jeff. 4,000. And it was done at a time when he had terminal cancer, and he delivered that chapter. And it's a really wonderful piece of writing. It's very grounded in autobiography, profoundly sociological, and peppered with "I told you so," which is typical of him. And we dedicated the book to Jeff because of that. So it's a fascinating document of changing times. £25 in the shops, but £18 cash today. All right, then. Or if you haven't got the money and you'd like a copy, take one of these. You can go online and you get it at the reduced rate. Right, then. Thank you for listening. Over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Could I just get my PowerPoint on?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to say, I'm Steve Walk from Bath Spa, and we started Ed Studies with Routledge in 2004 when we did a first edition of this book, A Student's Guide to Education Studies, and it's done three editions, and it's been successful. And Routledge asked me to do a series connected with so books on the topics, so chapters on the topics in the original book, and then books on the topics. I say I retired in 2012, and I thought, shall I do this? Because or shall I? Keeps me from falling asleep reading Anna Karenina in the garden. So it keeps me going, and I do have time to do it. So what we have is a series of books, mainly written by and edited by members of BESA, colleagues from Bath Spa, but also BESA members. So what I'd like to do is to just go through some of why we've got these books, and talk about what I think Ed Studies, how it's developed and is developing, and the content of the Ed Studies curriculum, if I can just try that. There's a real increase in range of the stuff that's in the curriculum now. It gets bigger and bigger. Neoliberal intervention in education, new theories on class, race and gender, intersectionality. gender and work. It's not, we've done stuff on gender, now it's what happens in work. Inclusion and higher education. You know, it's interesting that we do a lot of stuff about schools and children. There's very little, I think, in the standard ed studies curriculum about higher education. So I'm suggesting that that might come along. International and comparative education, we started doing that at Bath Spa quite early on. We're seeing what students being able to see what happens in other countries is the way to understand what's happening here. The politics of education, the current politics of populism, global economics, and the ecological issues, climate change, sustainability, those are the things that education is dealing with now. And the future with artificial intelligence, knowledge and work, what is knowledge going to be in 20 years' time with artificial intelligence and the internet? More increased breadth, child development and the nature of childhood. We are very much alongside child development. So lots of our students are doing combined courses in education studies and child development. So I think we need to take that on. And so links to those studies of childhood courses. I think, as I said earlier, I think when we started out in education studies in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we'd very much broken away from teacher education. We were doing an academic subject, and we were, I think, insulating ourselves from careers and professionalism. We were not teacher training. I think now we have to recognise that our students are going to be employed. They are going to go, some of them will go into teaching. So preparation for professional roles is something I think we have to take on, and teacher education. And work experience, students doing work experience in school settings. I guess all people are doing that. So that's the sort of breadth of things, and I'm sure you can probably think of more. But also, I want to say something about increased theoretical depth in teacher education. I think when we set out, again back into the early 2000s, there was a tendency not to make modules and courses about the disciplines, psychology, sociology, philosophy, history. I think those have been discredited in teacher training, you know. Teachers complaining that their courses were too theoretical and not concerned with pedagogy. So I think there was a tendency to not refer to those. They're back though. I think now course leaders are taking on and seeing that we do need the theoretical disciplines as the basis, as the academic basis for what we're doing. Some psychology, philosophy, sociology, history. And I'm also suggesting a fifth one, and that's economics. I think students need to know some economics now. You know, Keynes and so on. They need to neoliberalism. They need to know what that's all about. And look, this last point, and I call it meta-analysis, but I'm not sure if it's right. What I'm meaning by that is there are such things going on now that you need to understand where they've come from. So intersectionality. If you're a student, you know, 18-year-old coming along, and people are talking about intersectionality, you also need to know about critical race theory, work on gender, class, where those come from. And populism, the politics of populism now. It used to be simple. It was left-right politics. You could do it. Now we've got populism. We've got Trump. We've got Johnson. We've got Corbyn. You know, it's a different kind of politics now. So students need to understand that. So going on to the series then. These are the first three books in the series. Zita's book on inclusive education. So very much the politics and the practice of inclusion in schools. Christine Eden's book, Gender, Education and Work. All the issues about gender, but then what she says that while girls do much better at school, they're very successful at school, it's still men who get the jobs, men who get the pay and get the high status jobs. So it's not having to reach out beyond just what's happening in schools to what's happening in the workplace. Brendan Bartram's international and comparative education, again, does that thing about looking abroad, contrasting education systems and policies from different countries, which I think helps students to understand what's going on here. And childhood, again, Zeta again, it's irrepressible Zeta, keeps churning out books. So another one, contemporary issues in childhood. So looking at the, again, about the politics and new visions of childhood. And the first of the books which are addressing very directly the theoretical disciplines. So this is Cahal's book on the psychology and the study of education. So it's proper psychology. Cahal is a proper psychologist, not like those of us who've done a bits of Vygotsky. He came from the psychology department into education. So it's real psychology. And then the last one that's so far published, Philosophy of Education by Tom Feltges, edited by Tom Feltges. Again, a BESA member. He's a very strong BESA member. He's just gone. He was German, and he's reckoned with Brexit, life couldn't go on really. So he's got himself a job at the Humboldt University of Berlin, which is very high status and posh, so very great success for him. So we're glad to be associated with Tom Feltges. Okay, so that's two so far in the ones that address the theoretical disciplines. Forthcoming titles, the flyers that we've got show you the 6, but the forthcoming ones. Another one on the disciplines, Sociology for Education Studies, Catherine Simon and Graham Downs at Bath Spa. And then Economics, Jessie Bustillos from London Met is doing one on education and economics. Those are going in there. The sociology one is going in the end of July, and the economics one going the end of September. Brendan Bartram again is doing one on contemporary issues in higher education. That's just been approved. So that will be some on universities, all sorts of things to talk about in universities. You know, why are VCs getting such high salaries and so on. Why the marketisation of higher education, competition and so on. And just finished a proposal by Nick Joseph at Derby on the history of education. So that proposal is going in today. So that's so far on the just quickly on the book series. Going back to the book on the original book on the introductory textbook, A Student's Guide. We did it first one in 2004, and it was basically our course. I just got people to write a chapter on whatever module they were teaching. It was second edition in 2008, third edition in 2012, and it's due for a new edition. The third edition had 3 headings, 3 topics: policy and politics, global and environmental, learning, knowledge and the curriculum. Those were the things that we had in that. The new one, we feel we've had to extend that. I've got Catherine Simon is helping me with this because I'm just getting too old for this really. So the next one, we'll have those 3 first top sections, but a 4th and 5th section on childhood and youth and professionalism and employment, which I think that's the way we need to go now. So the first section on policy and politics, so education policy, social justice, race, ethnicity and education, gender and work, education and social mobility, education achievement and intersection. And Christine Eden's doing one on intersectionality. So it's that we are trying to address those difficult concepts. And inclusion, CETA's doing a chapter on inclusion. Global and environmental education. Brendan, who's edited the international book, he's doing a chapter. Globalism and populism. David Coulby's doing an article on populism and the politics of populism and how education relates to that. So that's going to be quite new. We've tried to keep up with what's going on, but also lead. It's not just a basic book, it's giving some starting points points, new starting points. Also in the global environmental section, religion and worldviews in education. And to those 2 points, education in climate change and education for sustainability, those children are doing this now, aren't they? We've got to take this on. It's very much in the educational field. Knowledge and learning, so the sociology of knowledge, again, trying to get the disciplines into it. Social psychology and learning. Cahal's contributed to a chapter there on the social psychology of learning in classrooms, very specific. And Tom Feltges, who's done the philosophy book, he's doing a chapter on philosophy and education. Creative pedagogy through the arts, and information technology in teaching. That is looking forward about the artificial intelligence. And childhood and youth, early years education. Zita's doing a chapter on the resilient child. And another big topic now, health education, children's health, mental health, physical health. And this last section, just a couple of chapters, one on work-based learning that Catherine Simon's doing, and one on professionalism, the nature of professionalism. So, sorry to have to whiz through it, but that's it. So, I'm sure, can you tell me things I'm missing? I'm sure you can. And any offers for, if you're thinking of doing a book, editing a book, you know people who want to do things, then I'm your man. Come to me out. Because it is through these conversations with people at BESA that all this has happened, I've got to say. And it's marvellous for me. I've had a wonderful time. So I'm not falling asleep in the garden. So do get back to me. Any comments, questions?